I'm here this afternoon with Christoph Evard, a Vice President of DEG based in Nairobi, where he is responsible for the organization's private equity, debt and mezzanine investments into Africa. We're focusing today on agribusiness, which is a key part of his role. Christoph, agribusiness has become a very hot sector over the last 3 or 4 years. Is that a good thing? Do you think the trend will continue? How far can it go?
I would think that it's a long-term trend, Simon. If you look at the underlying supply and demand drivers, I mean, you obviously can always make the point that high prices tend to take care of themselves by incentivizing farmers and operators to increase production, thereby decreasing the prices. Now, if you look at the underlying drivers of demand, I think they're very well known. You have the global population growth, so in other words, more people are eating food. You have high GDP growth per capita and urbanization, which means that people are eating different things, changing diets. They're moving to the city, they eat more processed food, they eat more fast food, they eat more meat, soft drinks, all the rest of it.
Doesn't sound so good.
Yeah. Indeed, but what it does do is that it puts a lot of demand onto corn and sugar, and we already know that cocoa is likely to have a severe supply shortage in the next 10 years or so. I think that's well publicized already in the papers. And then last on these, the whole biofuels discussion. Don't forget that 40% of American corn is currently used to produce biofuels. Now, are these long-term drivers? I would think so. I mean, you obviously have a recession would impact the demand, and then changes in biofuel policy will change the demand, but overall it is going to persist. On the supply side, what we're seeing now is that ever since the 2000s, the growth and yield growth has slowed down, which means that in the past decades, in the Green Revolution, the suppliers were always able to increase the yields on their land by putting more fertilizer, different crop types, etc. And we're seeing this leveling off. So we're having a situation where the existing agribusinesses cannot supply sufficient produce. So where does that lead us? As a company, you have two strategic options. Either you go and secure your supplies by physically taking control of the agricultural assets and the farming, or by using your market power to align the value chain through contract sourcing, through horizontal pooling of assets, but that doesn't solve the underlying issue.
Absolutely.
And that's where Africa comes in. Africa is probably is the only continent that has significant land still available for plantation expansion, and it has not seen any yield growth in the past years because fertilizers are not being used. It's all rain-fed. There are not many irrigation systems. It's a lot of smallholders. And look, for us as DEG, as a development institution, this is great news in a way, because we're focusing on developing Africa, on fighting food insecurity, rural poverty, Millennium Development Goals. So I think we are seeing more and more commercially driven investors joining us to invest in Africa.
Right. And obviously the agribusiness industry is a very complex one, with one extreme very small individual farmers, and the other extreme the big three American groups. Within that complex topography, what are the opportunities for private equity? Are there specific examples you can talk about where the opportunities fit within the structure, the return expectation, and the time horizons of a typical private equity investment?
Absolutely. It's a good question, because it is indeed the case that private equity has a very specific setup and structure. You have usually a 10-year closed-end fund horizon. You have fund managers that need to deploy capital and show their investors growth, returns, exits, etc. Want to grow their follow-on funds, and this all has to happen in a 3 to 5 year period. Now, if we look at our investments that we have made in Africa, just converting land to arable land and putting good yields on it takes 3 years easily. So there are a lot of everything that has
part of the way through the investment cycle.
Yes, absolutely. So a lot of the farming related side of things is probably better off with a continuously structured and well funded investment company that doesn't have these time limitations. As a private equity fund, I think you would want to include processing. You want to see that maybe 50-60% of your supplies come from farming, but that you also have other sources of farming. You want to go downstream into fast-moving consumer goods, what the big FMCG and F&B, food and beverages companies are doing. And there we see very successful fund investments and continue to do so.
Great. Well, thank you very much for sharing your insight today, Christoph.
Absolutely. Thank you.